The 30th Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the annual gathering of world leaders to tackle and negotiate solutions to the climate crisis on such areas as mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance, enters the second week in Belem, Brazil. We are joined now by Benny Kuruvilla, former head of Focus India office and now a Focus associate, helping Focus on its climate justice work. Good evening to you, Benny.
Hello, Joseph, from a hot and humid Belem.
So first of all, Benny, can we get a perspective on COP30 in Belem and the People's Summit from your experience joining the various discussions and hearing about what's happening in the negotiations as well?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. So let me first address COP30. It's an important COP for a number of reasons. It's 30 years of the UNFCCC. It's been 10 years since the Paris Accord has been signed, and Focus was at Paris joining the people's mobilizations. It's also a COP that's been hosted by Brazil at a time, as all of us know, of unprecedented geopolitical tensions. You see the rise of the far-right governments in US and Europe, and that's having an impact on the COP as well. But just to start off with some numbers linked to this COP, we've had 56,000 delegates register for this COP, making it the second largest COP, only next to the COP28 in Dubai, which apparently had a registered delegation size of 80,000 people. And interestingly, out of 198 parties registered to the UNFCCC, 194 countries have sent delegations. And the key country missing in COP30 in Belem is the world's largest historical emitter, the USA, has no delegation to this COP. Interestingly, the biggest delegation to the COP is Brazil, 3,805 delegates. The second largest delegation is the delegation of fossil fuel lobbyists, which is 1,600. But if you go to the countries, so you have Brazil at number 1, China at number 2, Nigeria at number 3, Indonesia at number 4, Congo at number 5, and France at number 6. So it's also an interesting dynamic where you see developing countries investing in large sort of delegations. And just like you said, it's been the first week of negotiations. And just to give you a sense of some of the key issues in terms of the inside track of negotiations, the fight continues on, long pending issues. And I'll just highlight 3 issues. One is Article 9 of the Paris Agreement on climate finance, where, the accord mandates developed countries to provide finance. That in this first week continues to be a big frustration for developing countries. As you know, the commitment was for a small amount of $300 billion per year from 2030, which is very limited. There's no clarity on how to do this. Developed countries continue to stymie the negotiations on that track. And one of the key issues that Focus has been following in Belem has been on just transition. So the just transitions now has a work program, and the G77 and China have been very proactive on this. They've been trying to push for a mechanism which gets a sort of formal space inside the UNFCCC. It will get access to finance. There'll be personnel working on it. And actually, even the trade unions here are trying to engage through the inside track, through the Tungos, the trade union NGOs. They have a lot of access to the Brazilian delegation. As you know, Lula is from the Workers' Party, and the Kutch Brazil has been quite active. So they're trying to launch what's called the Belem Action Mechanism on Just Transition with, solid, well-thought-through proposals from the G77 and China. And again, you see countries like the UK, Australia, Japan, attempting to stall sort of progress on this. The other very critical issue on the inside track has been the Tropical Forest Forever facility, which Brazil has launched. It's complicated international funding mechanism to reward tropical forest countries for preserving, forests. The idea by Brazil is to raise around $125 billion over the next few years. But so far, the response has been quite lackluster. Only $2 billion have been committed, and it's just from Indonesia and Brazil. It's been very strongly opposed by indigenous groups who are here in, incredible numbers in Belem. And they're opposing it for a number of reasons. It's too risky, it commodifies forests, it plays in the international financial markets, and even if it works, after the returns are given to the investors who will put the money for this, only a small percentage will be left for indigenous communities and sort of groups that protect forests. 20% of that, and 80% of the small returns will go to governments for program, management and policies around forests. So there's been a lot of opposition to that, and even sort of financial analysts expecting the fund to underperform in Belem. So that was touted as the big sort of thing that Brazil would launch in that. And yeah, like I said, it's the first week. So these have been, proposals that are being tabled. Countries are responding to it. Like I said, the just transitions work. There's also, of course, the global stocktake on what are called the NDCs, the nationally sort of determined contributions, the loss and damage fund. There's also been, within the just transitions work, attempt by the EU to use what they've been, saying is a climate policy from them, which is basically unilateral trade protectionist measures such as the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which developing countries are saying, go against the spirit of the convention in terms of, you need to have common but sort of differentiated responses. Developing countries are at another developmental stage. That's also a G77 fight. So, yeah, I think in terms of negotiations, it's the first week. Texts are being circulated. Things are going to heat up from Monday onwards. But, yeah, these are some of the key issues under sort of negotiation.
Yeah, you mentioned, Benny, the level of participation, no? And the fact that the US is not there. Although I heard that there are some state level representatives who participate. No? So just going back on that, and I saw a Guardian report that says that the corporate lobbyists outnumber the states, as you mentioned, 1 to 25 was the ratio that they said. What does that say, Ben? It's been a long-standing issue of corporate capture of these negotiations. Did you feel that in Belem and was the corporate presence really there, and you can feel it and very strongly? And what would the potential outcomes of this conference have, the impact of that corporate capture on the outcomes?
Yeah, I think this is a whole problem with the COP negotiations. And I think what is interesting that I've had with some of our allies is that there's a very strong youth-led movement called Kick the Polluters Out. And they've been demanding that governments should have more transparency. The funding sources of delegates and lobbyists and even NGOs should be put out in the open. So there's a very strong recognition that one of the key reasons that nothing has happened in the last 30 years on all of those issues that I mentioned is the very strong presence of lobbyists. And I think that continues to be a problem, but you also see it in the official COP venue, massive demonstrations by indigenous people saying that they haven't had a voice in, whereas you have, 1,600 lobbyists swarming meeting rooms and influencing text. Some of them are, official delegations as well, and which is what the demand is, that delegations should be putting out information on who's on the delegation. So, yeah, I think that is going to have a huge impact on the outcomes next week. One of the concerns of movement activists is also the massive presence of Brazilian corporations such as Vale, the mining giant. The agribusiness lobby is also very strong. And as you walk in the corridors of the official COP, you can see, flashy stalls and meetings being held by these groups.
Yeah. You just came from a gathering of the thematic social forum on mining, right? And extractives. Can you tell us more about how the discussions went and what sort of action points came out of the meetings there?
Yeah, I think it was incredible to be at the thematic social forum on mining, which brought together activists working on mining from across the global south, and also some countries in the north like Australia and Ireland. And the focus at this COP was on the so-called critical minerals and transition minerals, lithium, nickel, copper, cobalt. And we heard powerful, testimonies from communities in Chile, in Mozambique, in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Ecuador. And I think what was very evident from the testimonies on the ground was how the so-called green transition is a false narrative. It's mainly to sustain the extractivism economy of global mining companies. And as with earlier phase of mining, it's leading to sort of destruction of indigenous lands. It's leading to militarization of these lands. It's leading to violence and deaths of indigenous leaders and anti-mining activists. And I think the thematic social forum clearly underlined the right of communities to say no, the need to declare no mining zones. And I think the important need to, dialogue with people from across countries who are facing the same mining corporations, either from Canada, or from Australia, or from South Africa, and build, joint and collective perspectives on what a post-extractivist economy would look like. How do you create more, sort of sustainable and diversified sort of economies? And just to sort of add another perspective, I also have engaged with some of the trade union work on just transitions, because the work on transition minerals is also responding to the so-called transitions, right? And they are arguing that it's not just, it's unsustainable. And then you have trade unions on the other side engaged on the issue of just transition. And their argument is there are not enough well-paid, green jobs. There's not enough finance for just transition. But the important thing that happened within the People's Summit was they recognized that you need to strengthen alliances and perspectives in dialogue with social movements, with indigenous groups, with women's groups who might have a different perspective. But I think it's important to have those dialogues in terms of what kind of jobs can be created in the so-called, critical minerals, transition minerals economy. How do you sort of engage on from a grounded people's perspective on these issues, rather than it being pushed from top, which is what's happening in the COP, in the just transitions, irrespective of the North-South fight that happens between developing countries and the North on just transitions. It's important to engage from the people's sort of perspective as well, and which is why this COP, which is a lot more, open, and I can speak about how that happened at the People's Summit. I think that's been one of the big pluses of the Belem process, that there's been a dialogue between movements and a dialogue between movements and the COP for the presidency.
So I would like to end, actually, that's the good point to end. So what's next for the climate justice movement? And you've outlined that those convergences, and working together across the different campaigns. But if you have any final thoughts, Benny, on our engagement in the COP and the work ahead, not just for Focus, but for the climate justice movement.
Yeah, I think the People's Summit was incredible. It has been a process that the Brazilian groups have been engaging with for, I think, for 2 years. Apparently, more than 1,000 Brazilian organizations have been part of that process. In the People's Summit closing, the statement mentions up to 70,000 people who participated. Of course, mainly from Brazil. There's sort of challenge in terms of it being a truly global sort of process because of resources. It's been led by indigenous groups, by the MSD, the landless workers movement, by the CUT, which is the labor sort of federation in Brazil, the movement against dams, the movement against mining, feminist women's groups have been quite involved. And yeah, I think there's been a recognition, and if I can just try and get the statement that was circulated today. And I think the incredible thing was you had the COP president, the environment minister of Brazil, and the indigenous peoples minister of Brazil come to the People Summit today and receive the statement from the people's movements. And I think we'll put up the statement on the Focus website so people can read it. It's an incredible statement. And in terms of what next, the movement, like I said, there's been incredible dialogue in terms of key issues like the tropical forest facility, which is supposedly a southern response to the crisis of the Amazon, and he's brought in other countries in Africa and Asia on it. But like I said, that the response has been lackluster. There's been a solid critique, and I think that critique has gone into the Brazil presidency as well, because indigenous groups were at the venue. They stormed the venue over 2 days. I mean, and then there was a meeting with the Brazilian delegation. So I think the recognition from the People's Summit in terms of the way forward is to keep this dialogue going. And if I can read from the last section of the declaration, which was, like I said, submitted to the COP presidency, we believe it is time to unite our forces and face our common enemy. If the organization is strong, the struggle is strong. For this reason, our main political task is to organize the peoples of all countries and continents. Let us root our internationalism in each territory and make each territory a trench in the international struggle. It is time to move forward in a more organized, independent, and unified way to increase our awareness, strength, and combativeness. This is the way to resist and win. So I think, of course, Belem is a special process because of the strength of Brazilian movement. I think the next COP is likely to be Australia or Turkey. There are these two countries vying for hosting. But hopefully, like Brazil triggered the World Social Forum process, hopefully Belem will also, find ways to strengthen the climate justice movement, where some groups will continue to go into the COP and critically analyze and expose what is happening. But you also build a very strong, people's movements with concrete proposals on alternatives to extractivism. What is the people's perspective on the energy transition? How do you articulate a fair and just and sustainable, just transitions work program? So I think people were very excited by the People's Summit, and hopefully that process will continue. But like I said, this is the first week of negotiations. And, Lula in his opening statement said that the Belem COP will be a COP of truth. So the jury is still out. So let's see what happens next week. And we can also maybe do another assessment after the outcomes come, at least on some of the key issues that we just spoke about now, which are still in the negotiating stages. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Benny, and we will look forward to the follow-up work that we will all do on many of the issues that you've covered. So again, thank you to Benny Kuruvilla for presenting Focus in COP30 in Belem, Brazil.
Thank you.